So the content for today's video is how to add sound effect to your weapons. Adding sound effects to your weapons is actually a pretty straightforward affair because most of your sound effect, you can just add it directly to the visual effect itself. So for example, we have a lightning ring, right? And whenever the lightning ring fires, it plays an effect. Say if the lightning strikes an enemy somewhere here, then this effect plays. So you can just simply add the sound to the VFX. So I have a list of sounds from the last stream. So whenever you want to find sounds, right, there's a website that I like a lot. It's called freesound.org. There are a lot of other places where you can find sound effects. Feel free to share them in the comments if you find them. The one thing that you want to note when you are using sound effect from the net is you want to see what the attribution is. For some of the sounds, the attribution requires you to credit where you got the sound from, even if you modify the sound. And for other places, they do not require you to credit the sound. You got to make sure that you read it and make sure that you credit the author appropriately. For our video, we're going to credit the author in the video description. Alright, so I'm going to download this sound and we're just going to drop this sound right into my project. It's right here. Alright, I'm just going to rename this to Lightning Strike. Just give it an appropriate name. And what I also like to do is I like to create a new folder called audio, and this will store all the sound assets in my project. I'm going to call it Lightning Strike here, and then I'm going to import the audio over here. Alright, so I'm just going to go through the audio settings that you may find on Unity as well, because how you configure your audio can affect how efficiently they play. The settings that you want to take note of, decompress on the load type over here, and then the compression format over here. The compression format over here is the most important because the compression format affects how much CPU it takes to play your sound. Alright, the more compressed it is, the more CPU power it takes to play your sound. Vorbis is the most compressed sound effect, and then PCM is the least compressed, and then ADPCM is a happy medium between the two. So usually if you have sound effects that play a lot, you will assign them to ADPCM. This strikes the best balance between compression and also the efficiency of the CPU. For sound effects that you play a lot, you will use ADPCM or use PCM, depending on how much CPU you want to allocate to it. PCM will use less CPU, but it uses more space. Alright, and then Vorbis, the most compression one, it uses the least space, but it uses the most CPU. Alright, so Vorbis is usually used if you have background music. If my sound is 200 kilobytes and I compress it to say 100 kilobytes, doesn't really make a difference, alright? But if my sound is say 30 megabytes and I compress it to say 10 megabytes, it makes a big difference, right? Short sounds, you want to usually give them either a little bit of compression or no compression at all. I'm going to choose to give it a little bit of compression. And the load type over here, right? Okay, what it does is the load type here controls how the sound is loaded. So over here is the same concept as the compression format over here. Decompress on load means that the sound, when you first load it, it's gonna decompress the sound. So this will take up the least CPU to play and the most RAM. As you go further and further, right, compressed in memory means that when you load the sound, it compresses the sound and puts it in your RAM, so whenever you want to play it, you have to decompress it. And then streaming just means that when you are loading the sound, you're just loading parts of the sound. Okay, so short sounds, again, you can use decompress on load. That's quite efficient because you want the sound to play as soon as possible, right? Okay, the lower the option that you select here, the more CPU it's gonna take to play the sound every time you try and play. Over here, you have compressed memory. This is for slightly longer sounds that perhaps if you keep them in the RAM, it's gonna take up a little bit too much space. And then finally, you have streaming. Streaming basically is a load type that is exclusively used for background music. The reason you use it is because it's the most RAM efficient. Yeah, so because the sound effect over here is a short sound, so we use the compress on load, and then I'm gonna choose ADPCM. Once you have set the settings appropriately, you can click on apply over here, and then this will just help you to optimize the sound as best as you can. And then once you've done that, just find your VFX in the prefabs folder. And to add a sound to your weapon, okay, you just gotta find the appropriate VFX, add a audio source, and then you wanna do two things, alright? Assign the audio clip to it, the sound effect that you want to play, and then make sure play on awake is checked. And then after that, set spatial blend to 3D. And that is about it. Because if you have followed our tutorials, you would have configured these VFXs to destroy themselves after they have played one time. So what this means is that once you have a audio source attached and it's play on awake, whenever the VFX spawns, it's gonna play a sound effect. For example, me attaching an audio source to the lightning ring VFX, this gives the lightning strike a sound effect. So let me just show you the lightning strike in action now. Hear that? Okay, so just adding sounds to the VFX. Okay, I'm just gonna show you a couple more examples. So we have a player damage VFX as well. When the player gets damaged, okay, there's some blood that comes out. Okay, so if I want to add a sound effect to that VFX, I do the same thing, all right? I find the sound that I want, and then I download the sound. Okay, I'm gonna make small modifications to the sound here. The reason for that is because you want your sound effects to play instantly, right? And the problem that we have over here is that the sound effect has a little bit of blank space over here, which I want to modify before I import it into Unity. Okay, I have this software called Audacity. This is a freeware that I use to modify sound effects whenever I need to. Okay, it's very important for your weapon sound effects that the sound effects play instantly. So when you download the sound, you gotta make sure that there are no gaps in the beginning. If there are gaps, then you will have to remove them. Okay, I just highlighted the section over here and then press the delete button on my keyboard to remove the sound effect. After making the modifications, I can just export the audio, and then I'm just going to import this in Unity into the audio folder. Since we started modifying the sound, right, I'm thinking, you know, we can just remove this part as well. Okay, so the shorter you make your sounds, the more space they save also. Okay, it's just simple logic, right? So let me just re-export the sound again and re-import the sound. And what this does for me is, well, the sound is a lot more space efficient now. So every sound that you download, if you have the constitution, you want to try and shorten it as much as possible. One thing that I like to do also is, if you see there's some noise at the back, I like to just do a fade out as well. So effect, fading, and then fade out. This will get the sound to fade out to silence. Okay, just in case that there's some noise at the back that you don't notice when you're exporting the sound. Now that I have step sound again, same thing. I'm just gonna go to prefabs, VFX, and then player damage. Add a sound effect. So this time is the step sound, right? And again, same thing, play on a wake, and I have spatial blend to 3D. Okay, so what is this spatial blend thing, right? I haven't explained this. Spatial blend, basically, how sound works is, notice that whenever we add a sound, we add it to a game object. So the audio source is actually compared with the audio listener that is in your scene. Okay, so by default, the audio listener is on the main camera. The sound, how loud the sound is, depends on how far away the audio listener is from the sound effect. So for example, if I put a lightning strike here, right, then because there is distance between the lightning strike and the audio listener, which is on the camera, you will see that the sound becomes softer. So then when you assign the audio source to a game object, automatically Unity will attenuate the sound for you. Attenuation means that it's just going to soften the sound over distance. Right here, the audio source, it only attenuates the sound if the spatial blend is set to 3D. If it's set to 2D, it will play the same volume regardless of where the sound effect is from. So you want to make sure all your sounds are set to spatial blend 3D, except for background music that you want. I usually add them to the camera, but you can add it to any game object really. And then just make sure the sound is 2D, and then make sure you loop the sound, and then you just attach the clip onto the camera, and then this will cause the sound to keep playing. So one thing I like to do is I like to remove the audio listener from the camera and put it onto the player as well. Just something extra. It really doesn't matter that much. Okay, but you can see a notable difference in certain cases depending on how close your camera is to the character. So notice that once I move the audio listener to the player character, the sounds actually get louder because the camera is a distance away from the map. That's why when you are close to the lightning strike, for example, it gets very loud. So now if the lightning strike is far away, it's softer, right? But you see when the player character is closer, then it's louder. Yeah, so this is one argument for putting the audio listener on the camera. Perhaps for our case here, I think actually the audio listener might be better on the camera itself. Let me just change it back. So we've added a sound effect to the player damage effect. So what you will see here is that when the player gets damaged, then you will get a sound effect that plays. I just gotta let the player get damaged without hitting enemies. And of course, if the sound effect is too loud, then you can go into the audio source itself and then turn down the volume. Alright, so the stabbing sound maybe is a little too loud, so I'm just gonna set the volume to say 0.4. Yeah, so adding sound is a little bit, it's quite fun. A little bit of trial and error that you have to play around with. Okay, the reason why it's very loud is because the sound plays on the player, so it's very loud, it's very close to the audio listener. That's why it's very loud. So then you just gotta pay attention to things like that. Okay, so just tweak it until you get the appropriate volume that you want for the effect. Any prefab that you have, right, you can add a audio source to it, and this causes the effect to play a sound. You can add effects to your whip as well. So the whip, I found the sound as well. And same deal, you import this into Unity. For the whip, same thing, I'm just gonna add a whip over here and then play on a wake and then 3D sound, and you can play around the volume as well because we're gonna be very close to the whip, right? So perhaps a volume of 0.4 would be good. Alright, so no code required, right? It's pretty cool. You just add sound audio sources to your projectiles or to your hit effects, whatever effects that play on the weapon, and then this will cause sounds to play. Okay, very convenient way of doing things, in my opinion. There we go. Okay, the whip effect is very soft, right? Let me increase the volume. Okay, so I don't have any examples over here, but I just want to go through a couple of other configurations as well. So for example, if you have, you want to add an effect fireball, for example, right? Say you want to add a fire burning sound to the fireball. It's totally possible as well. Okay, what you want to do is just find a sound effect that loops and then make sure that loop is checked. And then this will cause the sound to keep playing. Okay, so there are certain effects where you may want the sound effect to continuously play as opposed to only play one time. Then you just check the loop. The other thing I want to cover as well is priority. So in the other stream, I was asked about how do you manage if there are too many sounds. So if you get into late game, for example, if you have a ton of weapons, right, a lot of sounds are going to play. How many sounds your computer supports depends on what your sound card, what sound card you have, and every sound card has a certain limit of the number of sounds that you can play. Okay, then what you want to do is, if you feel like you want to make sure that certain sound effects always play, you just set the sound effect to high priority. And then for sound effects that you feel you don't always need them to play, right? So for example, I have the weapon hit, the player damage sound, right? It's gonna play a lot, right? And perhaps I don't want it to play so much, I can set it to low priority. So sounds that are low priority will be deprioritized by the engine whenever there are too many sounds that needs to be played. Okay, then whereas the high priority sounds always play. So the highest priority sound, I imagine, probably will be background music. And then for all the weapon effects, you can assign them to perhaps a different priority. And then for the player effect, maybe you can assign them to a different priority. This becomes a game design decision as to what sounds you want to prioritize and what sounds you want to deprioritize. So it depends on which weapons are more important, which weapons are less important, and whether you think that the player hearing when they get damaged is important. Okay, I would think that actually maybe the player getting damaged would be a high priority sound because it's important, right? Otherwise you would die without knowing. And then maybe for weapon effects, say the lightning ring, maybe it's not as important because a lot of it is gonna play, right? Or maybe say the garlic effect, maybe you can make that a low priority sound as well. Alright, so high priority sounds will always play. Low priority sounds will get omitted by the engine if there are too many sounds in the system. Let me just add one more sound effect for you, okay, for the knife, to make the knife feel more satisfying to use. Alright, so if you recall, right, okay, under our weapon data, right, we have a hit effect over here. And what is this hit effect? This hit effect basically allows us to play an effect whenever the weapon hits something. Alright, so for example, let me just assign a prefab to the hit effect of the knife. So I'm just gonna add the player damage effect to the knife. And then what you will see here is that now whenever the knife hits something, right, blood will come out and then you will hear a sound effect. Okay, so the knife, if I add a hit effect here, when the knife hits something, do you see the effect plays? Yeah, so if there is an effect, then you can add sounds to it, right? Which is what we just established. Okay, the sound effect is not loud enough. Let me just turn this back up 0.8. Yeah, so by adding something to the hit effect, you will be able to add more sound effects to your weapons as well. So you gotta think about your weapons in this way, alright? What hit effects can you add to the weapon? And then what sound effects can you add to the projectiles as well? Okay, so these are two places where you can add sound effects to your weapons. We're gonna add one more event wherein you can add sound effects to the weapon, and I call it a proc. But before we do that, right, let's just fix a little bug that we have with the aura weapon. Okay, because we have this attribute on all our weapons, right? So if you look at the garlic, for example, right, you will see there is a hit effect as well. But if I assign a hit effect to the garlic, right now nothing comes up. So let's fix that, alright? Let me just quickly show this to you. Okay, effect doesn't come out. The reason for that is because in our aura weapon, we didn't accommodate for that. Okay, so let's go over to the aura weapon. Okay, my bad, it's not aura, it's aura. Okay, let's go to aura. And then let's look for where the enemy takes damage. And then let's just add a line to play the hit effect if it is a sound. I'll write a post later to summarize all the changes to the code on the forums. Okay, so you don't have to worry about this part. So over here, I am gonna add a line that says if stats hit effect, if there is a hit effect assigned, then we play the hit effect, right? So then we play destroy. Okay, that's dot hit effect. Target, right? So this will be pair, transform, Alright, pair key is the enemy. Enemy is stored inside the pair key variable over here. And then we have this. So basically, whenever you instantiate a effect, you gotta specify where it plays on the enemy, and then the rotation of the effect. It's always gonna be 0 because all the rotations are already configured in the particle effect itself. Okay, we're gonna add a 5F over here. So what we are doing here is we are creating an effect and then we are destroying it after 5 seconds. This is just a failsafe. All our particle effects are designed to destroy themselves after they play, but I'm just adding a little time limit over here, so if we forget to destroy the effect, then at least the code will destroy it for us. This will cause the garlic effect to also play any hit effect that is assigned to it. Okay, that's one thing that we want to change in our code. The hardest part of doing these videos is playing the game until I get the correct effect. See that? So now I have hit effect here, and then the garlic plays a hit effect. Okay, the other thing that I want to address is something that one of our patrons has pointed out. It is that if you have a different aura prefab for different levels of your weapon, right? So for example, if I have garlic aura here, and let's say I want to assign a different aura over here for level 2. This doesn't work. Whatever aura you assign here will always be the aura that you are using, so you cannot change the aura after you have leveled up. This is obviously a bug, and this bug is actually quite an easy fix. If you look at aura weapon over here, okay, whenever we add the weapon to our inventory, we play this on equip over here, which spawns the aura, right? So because if we have different auras in our weapon, then we will have to change the aura prefab. Okay, this means that under do level up, okay, whenever the garlic levels up, you have to also do on equip, right? Just in case, ensure that the aura is refreshed if a different aura is assigned for a higher level. Okay, so the other thing is under do level up, just add it on equip over here. Again, I'll write a post on the forums to summarize this. Okay, the other thing I want to cover is that I'm going to add a proc effect as well to weapons. Alright, so we have a hit effect over here, which plays whenever the weapons deals damage to something. And we also want to have proc effects. Okay, so we're going to add one thing called the proc effect, which is if you want to add an effect for when a weapon fires. Alright, the reason why I call it proc instead of fire is because in Dota, whenever a critical hit activates or whenever a chance-based effect activates, you call it procking. P-R-O-C. That's why I'm saying proc. Alright, so for that, I am going to go to the weapon script and then go into the stats field. And in the stats field over here, I will just add a new effect under particle system here called proc effect. And then this will play whenever the weapon fires. Alright. So proc effect right here. If you go into your weapon data, you will see proc effect. So we have a proc effect here. So then now we just have to implement the proc effect into your code. It's the effect that plays on the player character. Okay, so a simple way to do this would be to go to projectile weapon. Okay, because aura weapons do not proc, right? Aura weapons are always there. Alright, so let's go to the attack function in projectile weapon, and then we spawn a copy of the projectile and all that stuff, right? Okay, so whenever we do that, okay, we will also have to, let's see, if there is a proc effect, play it on the... Okay, so basically we want the effect to play on the player character if there is a, say we attach a proc effect to the weapon. So this means that I am gonna just do weapon stats, current stats. It's current stats, right? Current stats, proc effect. If there is a proc effect, play on play. Okay, so we're gonna again do a destroy, instantiate, because proc effects usually only play once, right? So we always just destroy the effect as a failsafe. Here, again, this will be current stats, proc effect. Okay, for the proc effect, instead of putting a position and a rotation for the effect, I'm just gonna parent it to the player character. So this will be the owner dot transform. The reason for that is because I want the effect to follow the player around, if that makes sense. Okay, this is the reason why I make the proc effect like this. Okay, and again, I will destroy it after 5. And okay, let me just show you this in effect. I'm gonna have to also add this line of code to the lightning ring, because the lightning ring overrides the attack function. So wherever you have code that overrides the attack function, you will have to re-implement the proc effect. Okay, just to make sure that it comes out. So the lightning ring doesn't use the attack function in the projectile weapon. So I'm just gonna have to find the same location and then where the lightning is fired, and then just put a proc effect. Proc effect will go, let's put it here. Alright, so it's just the same logic. And then under the weapon, let me see, with weapon, we can put the proc effect here. Okay, so if there is proc effect, we play on the player. I think that's about it, because the other, I don't think we have any other scripts that are unique, right? The X weapon doesn't override the attack function, so we don't have to update that. If you want to, you can also add it to weapon, but it doesn't really matter. Alright, so for the proc effect, you do have to manually code it to weapons that you want to activate the proc effect. Yeah, especially if they override the attack function. So what the proc effect does, let me just do a simple one for the lightning ring. I'm just gonna do a glow. So under VFX, I'm just gonna create a new effect here. I'm just gonna call this lightning ring proc. And it's just gonna be just a flash. So I'm gonna set the shape to none so that all the particles are in the same place, and no rate over time. It's gonna be a burst of particles, speed of 0, so then it's just a flash, and a lifetime of 0.1 to 0.2. Or maybe we shouldn't use a burst, we should use maybe a rate over time. Yeah, this works. Okay, so lifetime I'm gonna set this to maybe 0.05, 0.1, and then a start size of say 2 to 4. I'm gonna set the color to just a blue color, and I'm gonna change this to have an additive material. There we go. And let me make this brighter. And the duration is just gonna maybe be 0.4, and there is no looping. Okay, so what's gonna happen is, see that? So then we just play a simple like flashing effect whenever the lightning ring fires. And then I can also add a maybe some sparks come out in a sphere, and emission maybe let's set it to 40, but the duration let's set it to say 0.2. Okay, so then over here again we want to just play around with the color, and want to randomize the size as well. So 0.1 to 0.2, and then this will, and maybe we want to reduce the speed as well to say 0.5 to 1. Yeah, and then you get these little balls that appear, right? Then we can also randomize the start size a little bit more. And the lifetime, we want to make this shorter, like say 0.5. Then we have something like this, right? And then maybe we can also add some noise. See that? And then we want to change the, say, make the effect additive as well. And then last thing I want to do is just add a size over lifetime to make them, and then we can add a color over lifetime to make it fade away. Okay, maybe let me change things around. Make the effect fade in, and then after that shrink. See that? So it feels a little like magic, right? So there are some little orbs that are flying around, and there's a big flash in the center. Yeah, so then now we have a proc effect for the lightning ring. Put this in the VFX folder, and then I can assign this to the lightning ring weapon. And then this will give the lightning ring a proc effect as well. So whenever it plays, then an effect comes up. So lightning ring proc. So again, you can add a sound effect to the proc VFX as well, and then this will make the weapon feel more happening. You have a effect, you have a sound, you have like zzz, like buzzing sound or something you can add to the particle system. Okay, it's playing at a bit of a wrong place. That's because the particle effect, I forgot to reset the position over here. See that? So I just gotta set the position to 0, and then this should fix the issue. See that? And you have an effect that plays whenever the weapon activates. So you can think of weapons in this way. Oh, but the effect is not playing anymore. What's the effect? Okay, okay, one thing I missed out, alright, in the weapon, because I level up the lightning ring, right, and then the effect stopped occurring. And okay, so one thing I missed out was we've got to update the operator section as well, because we added a proc effect, right? The proc effect will have the same logic as the hit effect. So we just got to add one line over here, proc effect, proc effect, proc effect over here, and proc effect over here as well. So then what this does is that if we don't do this, then if we level up and we do not assign a new proc effect, then the proc effect will be empty. Just gotta add this line over here to the plus operator so that when it levels up, the system knows what to do with the variable. Okay, and that about wraps up what I wanted to cover today. Yeah, so I've covered everything. So So the last thing I wanted to share is just a list over here. I just made a couple of lists. I made a list just in general, right? This is where you can add your sound effect or VFX for weapons. You want to think about when the effect procs, which is like, for example, when the lightning ring activates, you can add an effect to it. All right, you can think about, you can add an effect to whenever the projectile fires. You can add an effect for when the projectile is idling. This one is more for sound effects. All right, and then you can add an effect for when the projectile hits something, or when the projectile dies as well. So if you think about your SFX sound effects and your VFX, your visual effects, in this way, then you can find all these little places where you can add sound effects and visual effects to make your game feel full. One thing that you will notice when you add sounds and visual effects to your game is that instantly you will see them feel more engaging. This is because sound and visual effects are what is known as feedback, and feedback is extremely important for making a game feel satisfying to play. Okay, if you don't believe me, just try and play Candy Crush, but try and imagine Candy Crush with all the sound effects turned off and all the visuals turned off as well. It's not gonna be as satisfying. Or if you play a fighting game, right, think of Street Fighter or any fighting game that you like, and then remove all the visuals that you get. You know, when you hit something, you get a big splat. Like when an attack is blocked, you get a shockwave. When someone is hit, you get a big splat on their faces and all that stuff. This makes a big difference to how the game feels. Alright, so sound effects and visual effects are extremely important. Okay, so sometimes you may feel that maybe if your game doesn't work, why isn't it working? It might be because just you're missing sound effects or visual effects. Okay, so give that a try. And I hope you enjoyed this video.